Of course you're relaxing.
Of course I am. Yeah, I feel good. How you guys doing?
AJ, how are you doing?
I'm all right. I was just telling Sam Asad that I woke up and went to turn on my MacBook Pro that's 2 years old and it didn't turn on. And so I called my wife and I was like, hey, are there any computers here? And she's like, look in your closet underneath the old sweatshirts that you never wear. That's never a good sign. Under So I found one, and then of course the first thing I'm presented with is, "What's your password?"
Ooh, that's
And
a tough one.
this is a 10-year-old MacBook Air,
Yeah.
and so I had
Tony Robbins, Trendkite 2021.
I mean, basically it was Dominators, which is what we called people at Trendkite. So it's
Wow, Dominators.
Dominators. That was my password. Oh, I gotta change my password. And I just told everyone my admin password.
This is Top Line.
This episode of Top Line is brought to you by Contract Book. Raise your hand if you love managing contracts. We didn't think so. Contract Book offers a holistic contract management platform equipped to handle agreements of all shapes and sizes. Through automation and centralized management, they unlock the value of your data while creating lovable contracting moments for teams and organizations. Visit contractbook.com to take control of your contracts for good. Should we officially start?
Yeah, I think we officially have started. I think
We've officially started. Do you want to do it, AJ? You can do it.
Oh, I didn't do it. Okay, great. I'm AJ Bruno, founder, CEO of Quota Paths. I'm joined by my esteemed co-hosts, Sam Jacobs, CEO of Pavilion, Asad Zaman, CEO of Sales Talent Agency. Let's get to it, my friends.
Let's get to
AJ
it.
has a knack for this shit. This is because he was doing a podcast while flying a plane. Like he had to keep people alive, like in the plane, and then he was interviewing them. So skills.
Asad, don't pump him up. Don't pump him up too much. He'll be insufferable.
I had a call with my CEO coach who listens, an avid listener to the show. He was really enjoying it. He's a big AI geek, so it was like his type of show. The Mark Roberge. And he said, AJ, you just sound like you're like, this is great. And I'm like, well, I was having some heart palpitations actually weirdly during this episode. He's like, what? I was like, yeah. I just, don't worry about that. But like my heart was like going in and out. Can you tell the exact minute? And he was like, I have no idea. So you're right, Asad. I was made to do this.
All right.
Opportunity.
Well, is your heart okay today?
It's good. It's good. Last week was a week for me. For those that don't know, I have one working lung, and I see a cardiologist. Health's one of those things. Is a tricky thing. We should do a whole episode on health. I know.
Yeah.
I think we would all appreciate that. And like, of course, there's the mental health, but there's also the physical health. And for CEOs, we just break through the mental health and we say, nothing can fucking stop us. And then our body says, womp, womp, womp.
Because you're internalizing your stress.
I know. Yeah. It's just like, I can't control my heart rate. When this was going on, I went and saw the doctor previously, like earlier in the week. And I was like, don't worry, I'm willing my heart to have like the right cadence in beats. And like, she's like, that's not how this works.
That's it. Oh man.
That's not how it works.
All right. I'm glad you're okay. Q2 just wrapped up.
Yes.
How do we feel? How'd it go? Asad, how was Sales Talent Agency's Q2? What are your thoughts, reflections for Q3?
Yeah, it was the hardest quarter I've had as a leader and as a professional. I think it was taxing emotionally, physically, mentally. So it was very much when we said we're in the trenches a little while ago, it felt like that. It felt like a fight. And I feel proud at the end of the quarter. I think most people that I know were optimizing for minimizing downside risk this quarter. And so it's not about, do you take a hit? It's like, what type of hit do you take? And we took a hit. We were down, but we were able to minimize that risk to an acceptable point. I guess that's the way to think about it. So at the end of the quarter, you look back and you're like, holy shit, okay, we got to this stage. This is good. In reflection, we are in the market of helping companies hire go-to-market professionals in tech mainly. And so this market is not a walk in the park for us. But for us to be at 150, 160 projects, we feel very proud that we've been able to stay up at that level. And we're not that far away from capacity, and we haven't really had to cut down either. And so we feel proud at this stage. We feel like the next 6 months are going to be extremely challenging, and we have to be extremely dialed in for this phase. But I think is the hardest part of this journey is the last phase, because you're as AJ said, you're the most tired, but now you have the Alps ahead of you. And that's how we feel right now. So it's like, what can we do to create that energy, create that enthusiasm, and also make sure that wherever we're deploying our energy is in the right areas. So that's been a heavy focus for us in the last couple of weeks. And I feel very excited because we're going to announce a new system that we're deploying that's going to help us drive demand in the next 6 months. And I feel very excited about that. So I feel positive about the fight we fought. I feel like the next phase is going to be really hard, but if we've gotten this far, we'll get through that as well. We will be standing at the end of this, and we'll be in a position to capitalize on the upswing when it presents itself. So that's how I feel right now. But I had a long weekend, so maybe I'm rested, and that's what I feel like.
So still 6 months. So we talk about this pretty much every week, but a couple of weeks ago, you were like, I'm at the, I'm a bit regretful that we're almost at the end of the hard times. But now you're saying, I pushed back then, and I think maybe we're closer to the same page now. It doesn't feel like we're at the end. It feels like there's more, at least 6 months, maybe 9 months more of hard times.
I think even then, my perspective was that it's going to be 6 to 9 months of pain, but it's the last phase of this journey. Like, I think this downturn has had phases, and this last phase is where we know that inflation is coming under control. We know what that means for interest rates. You look at economic signals, and you can see that now we're moving in the right direction from a macro economy perspective. And if that's happening in the next 6 to 9 months, things are going to improve. And I still feel that little bit of anxiety in me that when this ends, I want to make sure that I got the most value out of this experience, because I don't want to go through these experiences over and over again. If I'm in it, I want to get as much out of it as possible, because I think this is making me better. It sucks, but it's like eating vegetables. I fucking hate them, but it makes me healthier. So this is like that. And I do want to get the value out of the experience.
I love that you called Asad out on his bullshit that week, and then you just doubled down on it, Sam, which is great. Nice little reminder.
I'm not saying it's bullshit. I'm saying, what did we just were texting, and 27% of people surveyed in this Crunchbase survey believe that their company, 27% of people surveyed in Crunchbase's latest research said their company has 6 months or less in cash. And as Mark Robert said last week, there's still the bottom is when there's capitulation, and when founders say either, I need the money so badly, I'll take it on whatever terms are offered, or there's no bid on my ask, and I got to shut this thing down. And I think they probably, a lot of people raised a good amount of money and are still probably trying to, white knuckle it to through Q1. We're going to see. And so that'll be like the full bottom, and it'll be up from there, but that will still be, I feel like there's still a little bit more down to go before we
100%. This phase, like in my mind, the way this phase works is that it goes down further. It's when there's the most amount of carnage. It's when it's the most painful, and then it clears out. That saying, it's darkest before dawn. This phase, that's the perfect saying for it. It will get really dark right now, because when you look at, Sam, you shared that article and it shares sentiment. And then you look at the data around fundraising. Fundraising was down in Q2 by 40% compared to Q1 Q1, and Q1 wasn't like the best quarter from a fundraising perspective. There was 27.6 billion raised in Q2 compared to 45.2 in Q1. And Q2 was a pretty aggressive quarter from an AI funding perspective. So if you think about it, a lot of that money was AI focused. And so the rest of the market is just sitting there being like, we need some money, but they can't raise any money. If you try to like stack rank the challenges for tech companies, number one, fundraising, cash flow or runway, number two, churn, number three, new business. And that means that it's going to be a hard period for these companies, especially at that growth stage. There's 500 to 750 companies at that stage, and there will be many that shut down and many that have to go down in size by 60, 70%. But for tech to improve, the overall economy has to improve. And the overall economy is showing signals that it's moving in the right direction. They just revised Q1 GDP. It was up 2%. The estimate was 1.1%. If you look at the labor market, unemployment's up. Purchasing power of the consumer has gone up now because their wage inflation is lower than last year, but inflation's also lower now. So their purchasing power is increasing. So they're spending on things like services quite a lot. So you've got like a disconnect where when you only look at tech, it feels like this is the worst thing ever. I think you said it right, which is tech is in a recession. The overall economy is not. And if this improves drastically, then this will have the fuel it needs to get better.
By the way, don't you love that the US government can just say, oh yeah, GDP, we're revising it. We're opening the books again and we're just
we were off by 1%. Sorry, guys.
We're just changing. Of course, they get to do that.
Asad, I think I read this article in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, though, that it's not just tech. They called it a rich session.
Oh, I read that one. Yeah.
And my wife sells fine jewelry to rich people. So that was not great article across my iPhone. But AJ?
Well, the 2017, the number that you said, 45 billion in Q1, 27 billion in Q2. Asad, didn't we say Q1's number was the lowest since 2017? Wasn't that?
Yeah, it was for that growth stage. It was really bad. It was $1 for every $3.2 that they need. I forget how much money they raised, but Q1 was not a good quarter from a fundraising perspective.
So
we went from down to further down.
Yeah, 40% drop. So like that's the worst since when? Now, how far back do we have to go now? Are we going back to 2008, 2009 levels? Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah,
it's not good.
Yeah, it's not good.
But Q2. I think we're all like clapping. Even Asad saying like, "I really love the pain. Give me more pain." I think he's the one also that was the first and foremost to text. Well, thank God Q2's over. We started to dig into our numbers, Sam. It's actually kind of interesting. Like we've had the retention issue is something that every SaaS company, software as a service company is dealing with. But when we dig into ours, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as we thought in terms of the challenges we were seeing in the competitive front, meaning going somewhere else. Not anywhere near as bad. Like honestly, less than 5% of the customers that churned, logos that churned.
Wow. Went to a competitor.
Or went to a competitor. Yeah. And that was what I've been mostly freaking out. When you look at it and you break down the numbers, you have like the
meaning that they decided like we're just not going to use compensation plans.
We love the problem that you're solving. We fucking hate you. See you later. That's what I was saying.
No, that's what you were worried about. But their actual decision was this problem is not big enough to warrant an independent.
That was a piece of it. That was about 20% of it that we'll say. And then the other piece of it was just the macro piece of like we went from 90 sales reps to 40 sales reps.
All right. The usage-based thing that Mark was talking about.
Mark said your per user pricing models are screwed. Your TAM is screwed. But I think that and we didn't really dive into that in that conversation. I know, Sam, you had that perspective on the TAM. I agree with it. It's like, but it feels like that's the negative outlook because that's the market that we're living in. That's what we're feeling right now. Like in January of 2024, are we saying the same thing? But the generative AI piece of it is is stopping us from saying, no, it's going to be back. Like, that's to me of like exactly what it's like. I can't say that. I want to future cast this as a founder, as a CEO. This is what our future is going to look like. I've been pretty good at calling our shots along the way the last decade in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then others I've been off. And this one, I'm holding steady on calling my shot on this, that I do not believe that sales teams overall will be replaced. I think the three of us are hopefully aligned on that because we have businesses that
I'll be shocked if that's the case with sales talent agencies. So I don't believe it.
They won't be replaced. Here, AJ, here's an interest. I mean, I think I'm not a consultant for QuotaPath, but there's new models that there might be even more urgent. Here's something we're thinking about, right? We don't have a very big sales team at Pavilion. Right now, it's effectively 2 people selling our corporate membership. We have 1 enrollment manager that manages inbound applications. And most of what we're trying to optimize for is almost B2C funnel conversion through
efficiency,
product and engineering, and good funnels and CRO, conversion rate optimization, and stuff like that. But we're bringing back chapters. And I want to lean in, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, but I want to lean into this idea that in a city in Toronto, I want whoever's going to lead it, hopefully Asad will be part of the leadership team, but that it'll be more franchise-like. And they'll be paid on new member growth. They'll be paid on existing member retention, and they'll be paid also on closed corporate deals, sponsorships, or corporate teams deals that they refer to us that close. And maybe we'll even train somebody. And so we're going to have a sales team of 2 people, but we're going to have a field affiliate sales program that'll probably be 200 people within 12 months. And that is definitely something where I would love to build in some kind of easy software system where all of these referral partners, all of these fractional VPs of sales, all these fractional CROs, all these people that are like, nobody's offering me a full-time operating role. And I also like the freedom and flexibility of a portfolio career, but I don't really have the management tech, the infrastructure to like run my business that way. Maybe that's an opportunity maybe there's a new kind of salesperson that emerges.
Yeah, I love that. First off, let me also say I love the model. I know you've had a variation of this previously with chapter heads, but it sounds like the expansion and the retention are new to this role. Is that right?
It's the way it used to work was that Butch Langlois in Toronto would get an expanding cut based on tiers of total receipts. So what would happen is that in our biggest cities, there were people that were making $25,000, $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 a month, but membership wasn't growing because you get it to a certain size, and this is a side job, and you're making $300,000 to $500,000 a year. If I got it to that point, that's all I would need. And so we want to basically split it into gross margin and CAC and say, okay, the gross margin is going to be very low. You're going to get a monthly rate retainer. Maybe it's $10 per executive member per month. Right. If you've got 100 people, that's $1,000. That's $12,000 a year. It's a side job. That feels like good money for a side job. But if you grow, that's when you get paid. So we'll pay you a very significant cut of new annual members that sign up. We'll pay you after 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months of monthly. Once they renew 6 months, we'll pay you 10%, maybe a sponsor of either of teams deals that you refer to us, and maybe we'll pay you 5% of sponsorship deals. So you feel like, okay, I can make some money here. But you can make money by helping us grow. You can't make all the money by just resting on your laurels. That's the idea.
Yeah, that's smart. So yes, and the answer to this is in this per user pricing model, especially where you have more channel and cost sensitivity around it, it shouldn't be like, there should be these like channel users that are not the full price of the 2 users that you might have at Pavilion because you're just measuring it. And then ideally in this world, because you have like a sales and earnings for each of these chapter head, you should be able to effectively measure the health of each of the chapter heads.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. And so I'm sure you'll have lots of KPIs around that. For QuotaPath, the idea would be like their sales to earnings ratio and like who are your like actual top performers based on these 3 KPIs. that you want to take behaviors from and be able to implement them into other chapters.
Well, I'd love to support you if I can.
There we go. We got this. That was not part of the agenda, ladies and gentlemen.
You guys made a deal happen right now.
Do we want to dive into the political stuff that's going on? I think we have
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Wow. So we're skating out into the thin ice.
Well, I think Asad gets to be our objective, as
the
he's a true Canuck. So
it's very funny because I don't think anybody that's listening maybe they know. I mean, I don't know, because my political views have actually shifted over the last 10 years or so. And really they've shifted between Trump being in office and being out of office. So I wonder, nobody knows, in other podcasts, there's an archetype that everybody plays. David Sachs is the Republican talking point, and Scott Galloway is the conservative left-wing talking point. And Kara Swisher is the progressive left-wing talking point. And nobody knows. I don't even know what you guys believe. So
I don't know you guys either.
Hopefully we don't get canceled.
It would be amazing if one of us turned out to be a complete lunatic at the end of this conversation. Just had the wildest, craziest perspective.
My perspective, let's set the stage. Last week, effectively, the Supreme Court rejected affirmative action in college admissions, although it's been illegal to discriminate or make a decision based on race in pretty much every other industry. They canceled Biden's student debt loan forgiveness project. Both in, the sort of 6-3 conservative supermajorities. The GOP, the right wing, the Republicans haven't won a popular vote. They won one popular vote, and that was in 2004, Bush's second term. Other than that, I think it was 1988. So that was 1988 and 2004. No, Herbert Walker Bush.
Oh, Bush was Reagan won both of his
he did, but that was at this point 30 years ago. So, and then we've got. We can take this in any angle, but Asad, what's your perspective on the political situation that we're in? And then the other thing that's been happening, which I find interesting. I don't mean to take all the airtime, but I just find here's the one thing. Because I have some nuance. I don't know if they're nuanced, but and then there's this war in Ukraine, and it's wild talking to different people based on whatever publication they read or whatever media they ingest informs a lot of their political views. And I find it really, really interesting because my parents, for example, are hardcore progressive Democrats, and they are as jingoistic as they come when it comes to supporting Ukraine, giving them whatever weapons they want. And I am decidedly not of that opinion. But Asad, what's your take?
I would assume actually, we would definitely need to dive into that because I want to hear, Sam, about the other side and the pro-Russia piece of it. I would love.
I'm not pro-Russia. I'm against.
No, I didn't say
war.
You are, but you sound like you've talked to people. But you've talked to people that are on but maybe you're talking about the nuance. You're talking about
I don't like Putin. I just don't want nuclear war. Yeah. And I also think very strongly, because I heard Scott Galloway talk about this, and he's like, case closed. The left, anybody that was supporting Russia, and I think most of this is veiled, attacks on David Sachs. They're like, this has been determined. He's weakened. I'm like, do you want Putin weakened? Did we want Saddam Hussein weakened? Is the world better without Saddam? Is Iraq a safer, better place? It's not obvious. It's not obvious. And everybody acts like it's obvious. It's like, what I don't want? I don't want chaos in the world's second largest nuclear power. That's what call me crazy. And I don't want to keep sending the Ukrainians weapons and just ratcheting up the ante when there's nukes involved. So yeah, I don't think it's as simple as, do I want Ukraine to be an independent country? Absolutely. Do I want Russia to be able to invade their neighbors as easily? No. Is Ukraine a member of NATO? No, they're not. Are we obligated to go to war to defend them? Absolutely not. Is there anyway, I can keep. What do you think,
I think
Asad?
what you just said is such an important, it's something I think about a lot because I grew up in Pakistan at a time where, the Afghanistan war was happening, Iraq war started as well. And we had a lot of terrorism that was happening in the country because of all of this. We were supporting the US. And so there was a version of the Taliban that got created in Pakistan that was attacking Pakistani civilians. They killed, I think, 80,000 people in 10 years.
You mentioned that.
I missed suicide attacks. Like I was supposed to be in spots multiple times where like for some reason you don't land up there and there was a bomb that went off. So I grew up in the midst of this and was really interested in it as well. And when you look back at the dictators that were taken out of seat recently, those countries greatly suffered after those people went away. You mentioned Iraq. Libya is another example, right? Like look at Libya right now. These were both horrible individuals. Like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein were not nice people, and they were bad to their own people. But by getting rid of them, did we help those people or not? And you could argue that we made those countries much worse than they were before. And so I'm more in line with where you are, Sam, where I don't like Putin and Russia, but I don't think that it's as simple as just supporting every war against our enemies and just using this mindset that our democracy is the best thing. Let's get rid of this person, then things will improve. The reality is way more nuanced than that. When it comes to the situation right now with affirmative action, it's very interesting looking from the outside in. When you look at the way I've looked at this right now, we can talk about the specific issue, but the thing that keeps going on in my mind is that the Supreme Court has really lost that brand that they had. Like the brand that they had for a very long time was that politics doesn't matter, power doesn't matter to us. We objectively look at the situation and come up with the best ruling with the future in mind. We look at things like harm principle and make our decisions based on that. And then recently, you've seen that this is just not true. There was a situation where two of the judges were quite close to GOP donors. One of them,
Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas.
Yeah. One of them had sold a house to them. They'd taken vacations with them. Then there was the abortion ruling last year, where there was a leak around one of the rulings before it was supposed to come out, and that's not something that happens a lot. Gallup last year released some data that showed that the Supreme Court has the lowest rating it has ever had in 50 years right now at 25%. And so I think that's really first an indication of what happens when one party is able to make so many appointments into the Supreme Court, because you tilt it in a particular direction. And when you tilt it, you lose objectivity. And when you lose objectivity, you get rulings that, as you said, this is not the party that has won the popular vote. So their policies are not necessarily popular policies. And so now you've seen a couple of rulings that make you wonder how people are going to feel about this body that's supposed to protect them.
Well, history repeats itself. You look back in I think the 70s that most of the court was progressive. And actually before that, Roe versus Wade, I feel like, and I'm going to get fact checked on this, the court was actually a Republican leaning court at that time.
Wow.
The Supreme Court was. So the politics have changed a lot. We know this. And I think your point, what you just literally said, Asad, is that if you look back at the history of this and Obama's nomination not getting through the Senate, and you also had RBG not retiring when we had a Democratic Senate, like there's a lot, and like that was purely hubris. It was. She wanted to be underneath a woman president, it seemed like. And so like you look at these things, and these things by themselves don't seem to matter in a vacuum, but then they have this rippling effect. And Sam's point around going back to the Russia piece of it, around like, hey, is evil one or door number one on evil or door number two on evil better or worse? And we don't know the repercussions on some of these things. I would say that like, if I look at where I am from a political piece of it, it's changed, similar, Sam. Of course, I think we've all changed a little bit, but at the end of the day, two things are true. One, I am a family man with 3 daughters. And 2, I am a capitalist at heart. Those two things definitely have helped guide and lead my life, which I feel have been very fortunate and grateful. And the last few years have been very frustrating for me as a leader, because my team or my daughters, like from an empathy standpoint, these are things that weigh on them day to day, and honestly put roadblocks and blockers. And the fact that the company has to have a response, which is fair. Like I don't want to have the political saying like, this is what we should do, but we have to have a response because this is on the hearts and minds of all of our employees, is very frustrating. Like, fuck anyone that's making us have to decide that. Like, that's not how this works. And the problem is that like money in politics is part of the root cause of this. Like, I would love to say you just snap a finger and money's out of politics, because we know, like, we discussed 5 scenarios where money got involved on the Supreme Court, and it gets involved in the Senate. My brother ran for Congress last year, so I saw a big piece of this. And look, my family is very split on this. I grew up in a very Republican household. And my brothers and I have gone a little left, some further than others. One of my brother that ran for Congress is definitely a lot more left leaning than myself and my other brother. But at the same time, can't we just fucking get along? Can't we be human beings to each other? Like, what the hell?
I don't know, man. That ship has sailed, bro.
Sam, what do you think about this affirmative action thing? Because you mentioned that race is something that we do not consider in other areas, but we were considering it when it came to education. Where do you fall on this? Like,
I think, broadly speaking, I feel the following things. The first thing I think is that, to your point, I would say it more stridently. It's more that it's not just that the Supreme Court has lost its quote unquote brand, but I think it's actually a farce. I think it's grotesque, because the conservatives have a super majority, and they do not represent the will of most of the American people. And so thing number one is, and that I understand that it's like, that's the game and that's how it's played. And Mitch McConnell is a genius at playing these games. But if I were the Democrats, I would totally fuck with the system. I would my favorite thing would just be term limits. I just think it's totally insane that these people that weren't elected get, and they're in their mid. Brett Kavanaugh is like barely older than me. Maybe he's like 10 years older than me. He's going to be alive for another 40 years. So that's thing number one. Like, I think it is a farce, and there needs to be some kind of change to the system, because they have lost credibility, and this is all imaginary, like all of civilization is because we all agree. It's all collective hallucination. And once you start winnowing away at the threads that connect people, you're in serious jeopardy of imploding the entire culture in some way. So that's the first thing I think. However, as it relates to affirmative action, I guess I feel mixed about it, because first thing I think is that, slavery ended in the 1860s, but it took 100 years before even the Civil Rights Act. And I think that the reality is that Black people in America do not get the same chance that other people get. And I want people to have more equal opportunity. I don't necessarily believe in equal outcomes, actually, but I do believe that we need to help people have at least the same fighting chance. And I'm persuaded by somewhat I heard Chamath say, on All In, which is, by the way, if you're going to get rid of affirmative action, what is it? That was crazy. It was like 43% of all the people that go to Harvard are either athletes, legacy, or the children of donors. So the idea that, you're going to get rid of the special access that a Black person gets, but, I just know, everybody I know that went to Harvard got in because they're legacy or wealthy. I don't know a single person that got in because, now maybe I need to meet more diverse people, but none of the people that I know that went to Harvard because they were brilliant. They went to Harvard because they had special privileged access to the educational system that a bunch of other people didn't have. So I think if we're going to get rid of affirmative action, then we should get rid of all of the other special preferences that people enjoy. And I think that's really difficult. So where do I end up on it? I end up that I'm probably in favor of affirmative action, but I understand that it's become really, really hard to get into college, and a lot of very talented people are pissed off that it's become so competitive. But where I stand more broadly, and I also think the student debt forgiveness thing was complete bullshit. Like, if you take on a loan, I think you should be able to discharge the debt in bankruptcy. That's what I think. The fact that you couldn't, that whole system is so corrupt and fucked up. But I don't think just wiping away, which is basically more economic stimulus and which would drive more inflation. And so I kind of agree that they struck that down. But broadly speaking, I think that this group of people that's deciding on behalf of the entire country and upending decades of precedent in a number of different ways, I think it's grotesque. Last thing I'll say, which is sort of to AJ's point, there's this great book and movie, Charlie Wilson's War, and it's about how Charlie Wilson, this congressman, funded the Taliban, and supported the Afghan rebellion, or not really the resistance against the invasion by the Soviet Union.
He did it with the Pakistani intelligence. He was a very famous person in Pakistan.
Yeah, and brilliant and a great American. And there's this point at the end where Phil Hoffman's character, Gus Stavronakos, or whatever the guy's name is, he says, the ball keeps bouncing, which is AJ's point. The ball keeps bouncing. So what does that mean? In the case of Afghanistan, it meant that the Taliban took over and they became the Taliban, and then they harbored Al-Qaeda, and then, and everything that happened from there. And the same thing is happening in politics in the US, which is, for decades, the conservatives were trying to get Roe versus Wade overturned. So they finally did. You think, well, that's the end of the story. Well, of course, that's not the end of the story, because Dobbs has created massive political momentum for the Democrats. And I think if you look at the track record of elections and primaries over the last, not primaries, but general elections over the last, since it happened, including the referendum in Kansas, you see that the Republicans have given massive momentum to the Democrats in a year where the Republicans should have every advantage because of the faltering economy, and people believe that we're on the wrong track. So what is that? That is to say that the Supreme Court thinks that they're doing their God's work by upending decades of precedent, and the ball keeps bouncing. And maybe the next thing that happens is there's reforms to the Supreme Court that challenge their notion of what objectivity is. And maybe all of a sudden there's 5 justices added, or there's term limits, all of this because of the actions that they took. So
I know one thing's for sure. 2024 US politics is going to be a shit show.
Yes, it is.
It is. I agree with so much of what you said, Sam. I think when it comes to this affirmative action situation, I don't even know if I have a proper articulation of how I feel, but I know that I have this experience as somebody who grew up in Pakistan with relative privilege, that early on in my career, I was like, I never want anything because of where I came from or who I am. I just want it based on merit. And after a while, I learned, and my perspective broadened, which is that I want to optimize in society for an equal jumping off point. I think that's a good thing to optimize for, that equal opportunity thing that you said. And then after that, it becomes a meritocracy. Let's see who lands up where. And I think the fact that these universities have found that the lower their admission rate, the more people are excited to go to those universities, is a big problem. So when you have admission rates that are in 1, 2, 5% rates, and then you are, especially with the elite universities, where I think this affirmative action ruling has the largest impact, you have so many people going through with legacy as the core thing that helps them get in. Without affirmative action, you really change the percent of people from marginalized communities that can go to truly elite universities. And I think that takes away the opportunity for the equal opportunity thing from them. So I think it is a problem, specifically when it comes to those universities. And then the other challenge over there is that I agree that the loans shouldn't be wiped out, but also these universities should not be this expensive. There is no reason why Harvard should be charging $70,000, $80,000 a year. When you track back into the 70s, Berkeley was $1,000 a year for a person. And now it's like $60,000 a year for a person. I think it's just too expensive. Like, it shouldn't be. Canada, I think, has a good system here. Like over here, it ends up costing you somewhere between $10,000 to $20,000 a year. And I think that's an appropriate amount for an undergraduate degree. You graduate with, $40,000 in debt. You'll pay it off in a couple of years. You graduate with a $200,000 debt. Like, it's going to take you years to pay that off. I think that's super wrong.
I mean, if you guys haven't heard Malcolm Gladwell's revisionist history on the U.S. education system, it's a 3-part series. Highly recommend it. It's really, really goes into depth, and it hits at the thing that has made the U.S. a higher ed system what it is, which is power. It always comes down to that thing. I mean,
power and money.
Power and money. Stanford's endowment was like $34 billion, and Malcolm sat down with like I think it was the president of Stanford. I don't know who it was, and just asked him like, when is enough enough? And he couldn't answer it. Literally couldn't
more.
answer it.
No, you're exactly right, AJ. The endowments, these are businesses.
Yeah.
The endowments run these universities, and it's about accumulating more capital and paying these managers like they're hedge fund managers, and it all informs all of it. And they also, anyway, so the healthcare system and the educational system, two things that are completely fucked up in our country. Happy 4th of July, everybody.
But it is still the world's best country from so many different angles.
Oh my God.
Looking in, like I would say that my mother just went through cancer treatment, and she got diagnosed in Pakistan about a year ago, a little bit more than that. And she got treated in the US at Sloan in New York. And you can see that an element of private healthcare, how powerful that can be. That the level of care that she got was unimaginable. And we had gone and seen other doctors before, and the difference between the experience with Sloan and everyone else was massive. When her cancer came back the second time around, she couldn't do chemo anymore. She was too old, too frail, that type of shit. And they did CAR T-cell treatment for her. So they took out her blood, they engineered it to go fight her particular cancer. They put it back in her, and it had risks associated with it. But the effect on her body compared to chemo was nothing. And this was stuff that these guys were at the forefront of, and it's a private hospital, but then they get a lot of donations. They use that to give people free treatments. And I think that's like something when I look at the Canadian healthcare system is missing. There's no private option. And it impacts the quality of care is broadly available, but the peak of that care is not as high as in the US. So there are a lot of positives in the system, but like every system out there, these aren't perfect systems. And there's always work that has to be done to tinker them and get them better and better.
Should we talk about gun policy in the U.S.? Is that our last?
So I hope that's an area where we can find agreement.
I will say this. So look, Biden came out.
Pakistan guys. I want to see
Biden came out and said that, there's the going against the assault rifle, like banning assault rifles. But when you look at the data, assault rifles make up 3% of the killings in the U.S. Like, come on, 66% handguns. Like,
that's insane.
It's
my
point is what?
I'm asking your point.
Oh, you're asking.
Assault rifles aren't so bad.
If I
should we sell people rocket launchers?
This is so funny. Because I talked about my
Claymore mines.
My brother, who's like hardcore liberal, but like if you took away his guns, he'd be pissed.
Really?
It's so weird. Guns are so interesting. If they took away guns tomorrow, I personally wouldn't care. It'd be fine. Totally.
I'm in favor of. Yeah, I'm not a.
Do what Australia did. Do what.
But the data is out. That's the wild part of this particular thing. That the data is
collective insanity of our country.
Yeah. You can look at Australia, look at the UK, look at Canada, where you can see the amount of people that die that are gun deaths, like where those numbers are, compare them to where they were before the guns were taken away. And you're like, shit, this solves a big problem. And then people pointed to the First Amendment, and it's just, or Second Amendment, right?
It's the second one.
Second. They point to
we'll
that.
Forgive you.
I'm Canadian, guys. Like I'm stretching here.
I love how you started this call with like, I'm a Canadian citizen. We're going to talk about U.S. shit that I don't understand.
You guys can read our shit. We'll talk about ours one day as well. But like, it wasn't for the purpose of just owning it for the sake of owning it. It was to keep the government honest. This goes back to a clause in the Magna Carta, which was the basis for all of democracy, which was that there has to be some power with the people that are actually voting. They have to have power to keep the people in power honest. And so that power comes in the form of votes, and back in the day came in the form of some guns. That part doesn't exist anymore. These guns are not going to be able to keep a government honest or an army honest. And so I think the necessity for it is close to nil. And the damage is just so sad and so significant.
There's no practical, yes, and also I don't know how we would get all the guns back anyway. I mean, I think we have like 3 to 4 guns for every human being in this country. I think there's maybe 1 billion guns in circulation. It's a couple 100 million at a minimum, which is anyway. I mean, when nothing happened after Sandy Hook,
Then it's
that was kind of like when you're letting little babies get shot. Well, this has been a fun conversation.
Very uplifting, guys. Thank you.
And on into Q3 we go. Yeah.
I did all my deep breaths on the weekend to recharge. Now I need to go cry in a corner for a second.
Well, let's as we head towards the end. I mean, Asad, I still want to know, like, are you optimistic for Q3? You're like, I'm glad Q2's in the rearview mirror, or you're like, it's more.
No. I'm very much expecting the rest of this year to be a complete shit show. I'm optimizing for a shit show. I'm making sure that I'm learning as much as I can and taking as much out of it as possible. I think the signals are positive, but we have to remember that if it took a year and a half of interest rate hikes to get inflation into control, then just because the first time we see some good signals in the market doesn't mean that the market does a 180 and becomes fantastic. I think Mark Roberts spoke about it last week. Like, it's a slow process. I think in 6 to 9 months, there will be stability that you will start feeling. And stability is step one to the upswing, right? So stability in 6 to 9 months, and then from there, things will improve. I think, like, if you compare a stable environment to one that we're in right now, it will feel significantly different once things start stabilizing. I expect that to happen in 6 to 9 months, and then things start improving from there on. So I'm not expecting Q3 to be good. And I expect Q4 for us to be actually quite a rough quarter, because Q4 is generally where there's the least amount of hiring that happens. And then there's Q4 in a fucking downturn. So I'm not expecting any part of this year to be fun, but I do expect this last couple of quarters to be the last phase of this. And there's a little bit of, you just feel a little bit easier knowing that.
What happens to the 27% of companies that have less than 6 months of runway?
Boom, gone.
And
no one's funding them. Like, who's going to be like, here's some money, guys? Like, because the thing is that what do you need to show to be able to raise? Let's assume that a big chunk of these companies are growth stage tech companies, right? What do they have to show to be able to raise some money? The things that they have to show, they can't show those things. Like, you can't just switch a business from a one that's optimizing for high growth, fuck everything else, to one that's like in a couple of quarters becomes the perfect thing for investors to invest based on efficiency being the number one consideration in the market. I think it's a really hard shift to do. It's an expensive shift to do. Organizations don't have those muscles or built in. You have to bring people in from the outside to help you make that shift. And if they haven't made it by now, I don't think they're going to make it.
Let's do some quick back of the napkin math. So how many venture capital businesses funded in the last 2 years do we think there are? Crunchbase. Hundreds of thousands, right? Like,
I don't know, hundreds of thousands.
You think 100,000 or less than 100,000?
I think less than 100,000.
All right, let's go with 50,000.
Asad will know the answer to this. Just
I know he's looking this up.
I'm looking it up.
I mean, Mark,
there's 585,000 individual tech companies in the US.
Yeah, wow. That's a really high number. So we're going to take 200. I think it's 200K. That's my number.
Okay.
Okay. So 27%, we're looking at what, 50,000 companies? Is that right? Is that 55? Okay. So 50,000 companies are going to go under. How many people work for 50,000 companies? Man, these are the smaller companies.
I don't think it's 50,000 companies.
I think it's going to be a couple of hundred companies at best.
I agree with
because I think it's specifically growth stage, right? That's where this carnage is going to happen. Growth stage is there's somewhere between 500 to 750 companies at that stage that had raised at insane valuations in 2020 and 2021 that are essentially the companies that we feel are stuck. So I think if there are, let's say, 500 of them, I think probably though that 20-ish% of them will end. And then the others, I think, go down 50, 60, 70% in size. Well, and so I think that's where the carnage happens.
Yeah, you're looking at a couple thousand people to a couple 100,000 people. So there's a big,
maybe 100,000.
Wow.
Yeah. Does that under 100,000 people don't have jobs by the end of this year? Does that enough to like continue the slow bounce? The ball keeps bouncing into next year, or is that a recovery?
I think that's just the bottoming out of all of this, right? Like starters before dawn, like it's going to happen. It starts. But remember, 160,000 people lost their jobs in Q1. GDP grew by 2%, right? Like we still, like, I think we forget that it's 9.9 million people that work in tech in North America alone. So if 100,000 people lose their jobs globally,
no one gives
I don't
shit.
think that like fucks the sector up. Like I think the sector keeps moving in the right direction. It's just that this is a high risk asset class, meaning the wins are more pronounced and the losses are more pronounced. Right now, that particular stage is going to have to go through a lot of pain, but the other stages, public and early, are fine, and the economy is improving. So I think when you take all of that into account, you can feel that 2024 will be okay. And it's an election year. You think Biden's going to let the economy go up in flames right before he goes for re-election?
Oh, let's go, Jerome Powell. Let's go. I have a final question. Maybe we'll run a few minutes over, but I want to, AJ, Asad. So when do you throw in the towel? You're a CEO, you're a founder. Things are declining, but they're not terrible. But
did you get this question? Did someone like anonymously send this?
No, I'm just wondering because, it's like, let's say you've got 6 months of cash left. Let's say you got 9 months of cash left. When is the moment at which you're like, I could keep doing this, but it's not working. I can't see it beginning to work. I'm shutting it down. Because what I think is that is a freaking like that is the most difficult thing for a founder to reconcile with. And I think most of them, me included, would probably, we have access to a debt facility. If we're still burning capital heading into the end of the year and there's a few months left of runway, do you draw down the debt facility? Well, if you draw down the debt facility and you don't have growth, you're just delaying the moment that you give the business back to Silicon Valley Bank. Yeah. But what's the alternative? If you have access to a couple $1,000,000, don't you want that chance?
Well, look, if your board at that point, your board is trying to look for a soft landing for you, and you've got to come to grips with reality. It also takes, surprisingly, it takes a large amount of capital to shut down a business. It's somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000 to do that, including legal and lawyer fees. I have not gone through this process before, and hopefully, knock on wood, I don't have to. But I know founders that have. It sucks. It's a miserable experience. It causes families to be ripped apart. It causes depression over long term. But I've also seen someone who shut down their business in 2013, started a company that's now a unicorn. So you
still a unicorn in this market?
No, there are no unicorns in this market. There's only like ponies. We're all a bunch of fucking ponies, Austin.
Sam made this really great post about donkeys versus unicorns, and then he tagged me and Seamus as the donkeys. I've never been prouder of being called a donkey in my life. I was like, yeah, motherfuckers. I think it is really difficult to throw in the towel because part of what makes a person a founder and a CEO is this relentless drive, that this idea that you don't give up. So like to give up is really hard to do. And I think that's where your board does step in. I would say though, that this is uniquely the best time to give up, because you've got this fucking platform shift that's happening that opens up a range of opportunities for people to go and build brand new things with the lessons of, what they just went through. So if the option, let's say the option is not as like, oh, I'm in my last 300,000, what do I do? Like, it's quite clear what you have to do. But let's say there's like a question mark, like, what should I do here? Like, I could keep trying for the next 6 to 9 months, or do I close this and try something else? I think now you have a lot of reasons to think that closing shop here, where no matter how good I can get this, like what are my long-term prospects here? Quite limited. I've done a down round, the investors aren't happy, people aren't happy. End this and go and build something new in AI, I think is at least something that a lot of people are going to be thinking about right now.
All right. Let's move to something positive. Shout outs, wins of the week. Tonal shifts, massive tonal shifts, politics to SaaS.
This was something I was explaining. I think we've talked about it before. It's in the James Dyson biography that entrepreneurs go from total euphoria to like this like frightening fear that's terrifying. And we talked about that. This whole podcast episode was definitely a little bit of a roller coaster of that. My shout out win of the week is going to one of my best friends, Eric Charles. Eric is a thoracic surgeon in New Jersey. I'm trying to broaden our audience, by the way, by doing this. I'm going to get
there we go.
all of his
one mention of a thoracic surgeon. That's the way to build a
thoracic surgeon. Eric is a heart specialist, lung specialist, and when I was having some heart concerns last week, he was my first call, and he's been awesome. I'm going to see him this weekend, go for a trail run with him, and talk life. And I'm glad.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for saving our friend.
Yeah, it was good. Man. Yes,
we're glad you're okay, buddy.
100%. Very glad. Mine?
Yeah.
Now, mind you do yours. I'll do mine last.
All right. Fair enough.
Let me think.
I'm going to give a couple. We've got a small but mighty. So, talking about the end of Q2, not everything went the way that we wanted it to, but a few things have gone the way that we wanted them to. First of all, June was the lowest month of churn in 2023 for Pavilion.
Wow.
And I want to credit a young man named, so fuck it, doesn't matter how old he is. Don't you worry about that, listener. His name is Ben McCormick. He works on our member experience team, and he's partnered with Adam Liebman, who's a founding member of Pavilion, to improve our save and retention process. And that's a big reason. And we've just been a lot more sophisticated and a lot more ambitious. And so that's really, really exciting. I also want to give a shout out to Colin Tobler. Colin is the sole enrollment manager that we have on the team after we reorganized at the end of March. And Colin has just been working his butt off. He's doing 30 interviews a week, and he's accounting for probably half of our executive signups every week, and the other half come through our digital platform. And all of them are led by the amazing Brian Lee. Brian runs our member experience team. He's just one of the nicest people you ever meet, and just a great human being, a member of our San Francisco Bay Area community. So, we're heading in. We've got 6 straight weeks of executive membership ARR growth. We had 326 account creations last week, which is the new version of application, which is huge top of the funnel. We had 86 executive applications. So I feel good about the funnel, the top of the funnel. I feel like there's huge opportunity to optimize that. We've got something to work with, and we've got a couple people on the team that are really busting their butts. I mean, everybody's busting their butt, but those 2 people I just wanted to give special recognition to, Ben and Colin under Brian's leadership. So those are my shout outs.
Sam, those are great business signals. You must be do you feel that you can sustain that going into the next quarter? You've seen them now for 6 weeks in a row. Any reason?
I think there's still a lot of stuff to do. I think NPS is still not where we want it to be. And that's because the 2 big initiatives, which is migrating all existing members to digital and chapters, are not going to be done anytime soon. We want to be really deliberate about reintroducing chapters. That's going to take through the fall. So I'm a little, that's an area of concern. And then the mix of monthly to annual is needs to be tweaked, basically discounting annual more so that we can get more cash, a little bit more cash up front. We like the velocity of monthly, but we also like the cash of annual. So there's a few, but when you have top of the funnel, you have something to work with. When you don't, you don't. So that's why I'm motivated. We are at the base of the Alps. We're going to fucking climb the Alps, and we got this, and it's going to take some hard work, but we're ready.
The amount of times I've told this Alps story, by the way,
because it's imagine how tired they are because they already went through.
Are you all giving me credit for it at least?
I gave you credit 30% of the time.
30%.
Yeah. Then I was like, fuck it. I've said it enough. It's mine now.
It's mine now. Trademark AJ Bruno.
I think, Sam, that one of the things I've learned I'm doing recently is this morning routine where I actually try to write down what I'm grateful for and a win of the previous day. I don't celebrate things enough, and so it's an exercise to try and put that into my head. And it feels like those are such big wins looking from the outside, top of the funnel. There was this interview I was listening to of a CRO. They asked him, what are your top 3 concerns in life as a CRO? He's like, number 1, pipeline, number 2, pipeline, number 3, pipeline. He's like, why? He's like, well, if I have pipeline, everything else is a process thing. I can figure that shit out. Like that pipeline's the magic. And so those are like wonderful signals looking from the outside. So congratulations. In terms of the shout out, I want to shout out my business partner, Kristen Condon. She's our chief customer officer. She was employee number 4 or 5 at STA about 15 years ago. When I joined, she just came back from mat leave, and we sat next to each other for a little bit. And I peppered her with a million bad questions. And she spent a lot of time teaching me things that became very useful to me in my journey. So I'll always be thankful of that. And we now run the business together. And it is just, this is us in the trenches. It's emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausting and taxing. But it feels winnable when you're doing it with great people. And STA has amazing people, and she's an amazing partner to do this with. So I feel very grateful about the fight we fought last quarter and our ability to continue into Q3, because of the team and because of her. So she's my shout out.
And this has been another stimulating episode of Top Line, everybody. AJ, you want to tell us what we should do?
Oh, what we should do? We're going to go destroy Q3 and do it appropriately. So from myself, AJ Bruno, founder, CEO of QuotaPath, Sam Jacobs, founder, CEO of Pavilion, Asad Zaman, CEO of Sales Talent Agency. Another great episode. Have a great week. 5 stars on the iTunes store. Rate us wherever you get your podcast. Tell your friends, write a positive review. And thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. This episode of Top Line was brought to you by Contract Book. Contract Book's holistic contract management platform allows businesses to scale with accessible, actionable, future-proof contracts. Step into the new era at contractbook.com and take control of your contracts for good.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Top Line. To learn more about the trends, news, and developments impacting the world of B2B SaaS, head to joinpavilion.com, where more than 10,000 of the world's top go-to market leaders go to achieve and unlock their full professional potential.